You ever have that moment when life grabs you by the throat and forces you to see people for who they really are? When the ones you'd give your last breath for show you exactly how disposable you are to them? That moment doesn't come with warning. It hits you in silence, in the middle of an ordinary day, and suddenly the people you trusted the most feel like strangers standing in your living room. That's the day I stopped believing that family automatically meant loyalty. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now, then let's get back to the story. My name is Maya Thorne, and I'm 27 years old. 3 months ago, I learned that lesson in a way I'll never forget. It started on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. I was at work, trying to meet a deadline, when my phone started buzzing nonstop. It was my mom. She never called during work hours unless it was something serious. I picked up, already bracing myself for bad news. "Maya?" Her voice trembled. "Sweetheart, I need your help. The house. It's about to be taken by the bank." My heart dropped. "Wait, what? How?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. "We're behind again," she said, breaking into a sob. "The mortgage company sent another notice. If we don't come up with $20,000 this week, they'll start foreclosure. Your father's been trying, but—" Her words faded into silence. $20,000. It might as well have been $1 million. But this was my family, the same people who raised me, who gave me everything when I had nothing. I didn't even think twice. I told her I'd handle it. I drained my savings that same evening. Every dollar I'd been collecting for years, my first home fund, my emergency money, gone in a few clicks. I told myself it was worth it. That family came first. My mom cried with relief over the phone, whispering, "You're an angel, Maya. You saved us." My dad texted me later that night, "Appreciate it." That was it. No call, no thanks. Just 2 words. Still, I brushed it off. Gratitude wasn't really their strong suit, but I figured actions spoke louder. I thought maybe, for once, they'd see me as more than their too independent daughter. Maybe they'd finally respect me. For a little while, it seemed like everything went back to normal. I even stopped by for dinner a couple of weeks later. My younger brother Ethan was there too, their golden boy. He's 2 years younger, barely worked a real job, but somehow he was always the favorite. Mom adored him, Dad worshipped him. I used to think it was just the usual family dynamic. But that night proved it was so much worse. Dinner started fine, until Dad brought up Ethan's new big idea. He was quitting college to start a streaming career. I smiled politely and said, "That's bold. Maybe finish your degree first, though, just to be safe." I said it gently, calmly. But you'd think I'd just insulted the entire bloodline. Dad slammed his fork down so hard the table rattled. "So now you're the expert on life choices, huh?" He barked. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan leaned back with that smug little grin he always wore. "I didn't mean it like that," I said quickly, my hands raised. Enough," Dad snapped. "You think because you've got your own apartment and a job you're better than us? You think you get to lecture your brother?" Mom's voice cut in, sharp and cold. "Maybe you should just stop coming around if you can't respect this family." I froze. "Excuse me?" She stood up, folded her arms, and glared at me like I was a stranger. "You heard me." Then Dad pointed toward the door and said words I'll never forget. "Get out!" For a second, I thought he was bluffing. "Dad, come on, you can't be serious." I said, "Get out," he repeated, his tone final. "And don't come back until you learn some respect." I laughed in disbelief, waiting for someone to crack a smile, to tell me it was a joke. But no one did. They just stood there, staring. Even Ethan, he didn't say a word. He just watched. I packed my things that night. My dad didn't say another word. My mom stayed by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her expression frozen. No hug. No apology. Nothing. When I stepped outside, my dad slammed the door so hard the sound echoed down the street. That was the last time I saw them. For weeks, I didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't check in. I told myself I was done being the family's safety net. If they wanted me gone, they got their wish. I poured everything into my work and tried to move on, though a small part of me kept hoping they'd realize how wrong they'd been. But silence has a way of answering questions you're too scared to ask. Then, 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed again. "Dad," the screen read. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hey, Maya," he said casually, like nothing had happened. "Just wanted to ask. What's going on with the house payments?" I blinked, confused. "The house payments?" "Yeah, the mortgage. You sent that $20,000, but the bank says we're behind again." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "Oh, you didn't get the memo," I said. "What memo?" "I don't live there anymore," I replied. "You told me to leave, remember?" He paused. Then, in that fake friendly tone he used whenever he needed something, he said, "Come on, don't be like that." "We're family," I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "You don't get to throw me out and then ask for more money." "You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a bank account." "Well, this ATM is officially closed. Good luck." And I hung up. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights shimmer like tiny promises in the dark. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm, no more guilt, no more pretending. I had given everything I could, and they threw it back in my face. But life has a funny way of evening the scales, and I had no idea just how much karma still had in store for them. It's a joke. But no one did. They just stared. Even Ethan looked proud of himself. That was the night everything broke. I left, dragging my suitcase across the cold tiles while my mother silently watched from the kitchen. My father didn't move. When the door shut behind me, I felt something inside me die quietly. I didn't cry, not that night. I just drove aimlessly until I ended up at a small roadside diner on the edge of town. I sat there for hours, staring at my reflection in the window, wondering how love could turn so cruel so fast. The first few weeks alone were rough. I'd wake up expecting a call or at least a message. Nothing came. I wanted to believe they'd realize their mistake and reach out, but silence became my answer. I focused on work, buried myself in projects, but there was a heaviness that wouldn't leave. I had sacrificed my future savings for them, and they erased me without a second thought. Then one evening, my phone rang. "Dad," the screen read. My chest tightened. I answered cautiously. "Hey," he said casually, like nothing had happened. "Just wondering, what's going on with the house payments?" "The what?" I said, half laughing. "The mortgage," he repeated. "You sent that $20,000, but the bank says we're behind again. Did you pay the next installment?" For a second, I thought I misheard. "You can't be serious," I replied. "What's that supposed to mean?" He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. "It means," I said, keeping my tone calm, "that I don't live there anymore." "You told me to leave, remember?" He sighed like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Maya, don't be like that. We're family," I almost laughed. "Family? You kicked me out because I told Ethan to finish college. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a bank account. Well, the account's closed. Try another ATM." And I hung up. It felt good. It felt free. For the first time, I had drawn a line and refused to be guilt-tripped into saving them again. But part of me still couldn't believe how easily they treated me like a stranger. 3 weeks later, I found out through a neighbor that their house had gone up for auction. The listing was all over the real estate site. The home I grew up in, sold to the highest bidder. I watched the online photos like I was scrolling through someone else's memories. The faded red porch, the cracked driveway, the garden where Mom used to plant lilies every spring. It was all gone, boxed and priced for strangers. You'd think I'd feel guilty, right? That somewhere deep inside I'd want to help again. But I didn't, not even a little. Instead, I felt a strange, cold satisfaction. They'd finally learned what it felt like to fall without a safety net. One night, out of curiosity, I checked my voicemail. There were 3 messages from Mom, each more desperate than the last. "Maya, please call us back. We didn't mean what we said." Then another. "They've scheduled the foreclosure. We need your help." And the final one, her voice trembling. "The house is gone. Your father won't talk to anyone. I don't know what to do." I deleted them all without listening twice. Because I'd already done everything I could. I gave them my savings, my patience, my forgiveness, and they threw it away like it meant nothing. A week later, I ran into Ethan downtown by accident. He was standing outside a coffee shop, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me, he froze. "Maya?" he said awkwardly. "Hey." "Hey," I replied. He looked thinner, stressed, like the world had finally caught up with him. "Listen, about what happened. Mom's really upset. Dad, too." "Upset that they lost the house, or upset that they lost their favorite scapegoat?" I asked. He looked away, shoving his hands into his pockets. "They didn't mean to kick you out, you know. Dad he was angry." I smiled faintly. "Angry?" He told me to leave and slammed the door in my face. "That's not anger, Ethan. That's who he really is." He didn't argue. He just stood there, shifting awkwardly. Then he said quietly, "They're living with Aunt Karen now. It's not going well." I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered every time they made me feel small. Every time they chose him over me. Every time they made me believe I owed them something for existing. "That's their problem," I said finally. "Not mine." And I walked away. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights flicker. I thought about how I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their love when all they wanted was control. But in losing them, I'd gained something far more valuable: peace. Still, life wasn't done teaching me lessons. Because a month later, when I least expected it, the past found a way to knock on my door again. Louder than ever, dragging all its consequences with it. "Count." Well, the account's closed. Try another ATM. After that call, I thought I'd finally close the book on that chapter of my life. But pain doesn't disappear just because you stop talking about it. It lingers in the quiet moments, in the spaces where love used to live. I spent nights wondering if I'd done the right thing. Then I'd remind myself, I gave them everything, and they still threw me away. Sometimes you have to accept that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, even if they built the house you grew up in. 2 months passed before I heard from them again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Maya, it's Mom, please call." "It's about Dad." I stared at it for a while, torn between anger and worry. Against my better judgment, I called back. Her voice was hoarse and shaky. "Your father's in the hospital," she said. "He had a mild stroke. They said it was stress, please. He wants to see you." Every part of me screamed not to go. But the little girl who still wanted her parents' approval couldn't ignore it. So I went. When I walked into that hospital room, the sight hit me hard. My father looked smaller somehow, tired, fragile. His face was pale, and the machines hummed softly around him. Mom sat beside him, holding his hand. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Dad opened his eyes slowly. For a second, I thought he wouldn't say anything. Then, in a voice that was more air than sound, he murmured, "Hey, kiddo." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand an apology. But instead, I just said, "Hi, Dad." He looked away. "You were right," he said after a long pause. "About Ethan, about everything. I messed up." The words should have made me feel better, but they didn't. They just made me sad. Because apologies that come after the damage are like bandages on broken glass. They don't fix what's already shattered. Mom wiped her eyes. "We lost the house, Maya. Everything. We're staying at Karen's, but it's not the same," I nodded slowly. "I know." Then Dad looked at me, his eyes clouded with regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me. His voice cracked. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. We sat in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't warm or comfortable, but it was something, a fragile truce between who we were and what we'd become. When I left the hospital that night, I didn't promise to come back soon. I didn't say "I forgive you," but I also didn't carry the same weight I walked in with. Some closures don't come with words, they come with peace. A few weeks later, Mom called again. This time, her tone was steadier. "Your father's home now," she said. "He's doing better. We're trying to start over." Then, after a pause, "I understand if you can't be part of that yet. I just want you to know we're proud of you." I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. Proud of me. It was strange how the words I'd wanted my entire life felt so small when they finally arrived. But they didn't sting anymore. I'd already learned how to live without their approval. Months passed. I moved to a new city, started a job that I actually loved, met people who treated me like I mattered. Slowly, I built a new kind of family, the kind that doesn't demand your worth, but recognizes it. Sometimes I still think about that old house, the creaking stairs, the smell of Mom's coffee in the morning, the laughter that once filled its walls before everything went wrong. I wonder if it still stands, if another family lives there now, making their own memories where mine once ended. But I don't feel bitterness anymore, just acceptance. Because here's what I've learned. Sometimes, losing the people who hurt you is the most painful way to find yourself. And sometimes, walking away isn't revenge. It's healing. I share my story not for sympathy, but for anyone out there who's been made to feel like their kindness was a weakness. It's not. Boundaries are not betrayal. Walking away from toxicity isn't cruelty. It's courage. So if you're listening right now, wondering if you should keep holding on to people who only remember you when they need something, don't. Let them go. Because silence, when chosen with strength, speaks louder than any apology ever could. And sometimes your peace is the loudest revenge of all.